The Abbasid Caliphate was the third of the Islamic caliphates to succeed the Islamic prophet Muhammad. The Abbasid dynasty descended from Muhammad's youngest uncle, Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, from whom the dynasty takes its name. They ruled as caliphs for most of the period from the capital in Baghdad in modern-day Iraq. After assuming authority over the Muslim Empire from the Umayyads in 750 CE, the Abbasid Caliphate first centered its government in Kufa, but in 762 the Caliph Al-Mansur founded the city of Baghdad, north of the Sasanian capital city of Ctesiphon. The choice of a capital close to Persia proper reflected a growing reliance on Persian bureaucrats, most notably of the Barmakid family, to govern the territories conquered by Arab Muslims, as well as an increasing inclusion of non-Arab Muslims in the Ummah. Despite this initial cooperation, the Abbasids of the late 8th century had alienated both Arab Mawali and Iranian bureaucrats, and were forced to cede authority over Al-Andalus and Maghreb to the Umayyads, Morocco to the Umayyad dynasty, Ifriqiya to the Aghlabids, and Egypt to the Shiite Caliphate of the Fatimids. The political power of the caliphs largely ended with the rise of the Buyids and the Seljuk Turks. Although Abbasid leadership over the vast Islamic empire was gradually reduced to a ceremonial religious function, the dynasty retained control over its Mesopotamian domain. The capital city of Baghdad became a center of science, culture, philosophy and invention during the Golden Age of Islam. This period of cultural fruition ended in 1258 with the sack of Baghdad by the Mongols under Hulagu Khan. The Abbasid line of rulers, and Muslim culture in general, re-centered themselves in the Mamluk capital of Cairo in 1261. Though lacking in political power, the dynasty continued to claim authority in religious matters until after the Ottoman conquest of Egypt. History. Abbasid Revolution. The Abbasid caliphs were Arabs descended from Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, one of the youngest uncles of Muhammad and of the same Banu Hashim clan. The Abbasids claimed to be the true successors of Prophet Muhammad in replacing the Umayyad descendants of Banu Umayyad by virtue of the closer bloodline to Muhammad. The Abbasids also distinguished themselves from the Umayyads by attacking the moral character and administration in general. According to Ara Lapidus, the Abbasid revolt was supported largely by Arabs, mainly the aggrieved settlers of MARW, with the addition of the Yemeni faction and the Mawali. The Abbasids also appealed to non-Arab Muslims, known as Mawali, who remained outside the kinship-based society of the Arabs and were perceived as a lower class within the Umayyad Empire. Mohammed Abu Ali, a great-grandson of Abbas, began to campaign for the return of power to the family of Prophet Muhammad, the Hashemites, in Persia during the reign of Umar II. During the reign of Marwan II, this opposition culminated in the rebellion of Ibrahim the Imam, the fourth in descent from Abbas, supported by the province of Khorasan, Iran. Even though the governor opposed them and the Shiite Arabs, he achieved considerable success, but was captured in the year 747 and died, possibly assassinated, in prison. On the 9th of June 747, Abu Muslim successfully initiated an open revolt against Umayyad rule, which was carried out under the sign of the Black Standard. Close to 10,000 soldiers were under Abu Muslim's command when the hostilities officially began in Mur. General Qutb followed the fleeing governor Nasr ibn Sayyar west, defeating the Umayyads at the Battle of Nishapur, the Battle of Gorgan, the Battle of Nahavand and finally in the Battle of Karbala. The quarrel was taken up by Ibrahim's brother Abdullah, known by the name of Abu al-Abbas as-Safar, who defeated the Umayyads in 750 in the Battle of the Zab near the Great Zab, and was subsequently proclaimed caliph. After this loss, Marwan fled to Egypt, where he was subsequently assassinated. The remainder of his family, barring one male, were also eliminated. Immediately after the victory, Safa sent his forces to Central Asia, where his forces fought against Tang expansion during the Battle of Talas. Barmakids, who were instrumental in building Baghdad, introduced the world's first recorded paper mill in Baghdad, thus beginning a new era of intellectual rebirth in the Abbasid domain. As Safa focuses on putting down numerous rebellions in Syria and Mesopotamia, the Byzantines conduct raids during these early distractions. Power. The first change the Abbasids, under Al-Mansur, made was to move the empire's capital from Damascus in Syria to Baghdad in Iraq. This was to both appease as well to be closer to the Persian Muwali support base that existed in this region, more influenced by Persian history and culture, and part of the Persian Muwali demand for less Arab dominance in the empire. Baghdad was established on the Tigris River in 762. A new position, that of the vizier, was also established to delegate central authority, and even greater authority was delegated to local emirs. Eventually, this meant that many Abbasid caliphs were relegated to a more ceremonial role than under the Umayyads, as the viziers began to exert greater influence, and the role of the old Arab aristocracy was slowly replaced by a Persian bureaucracy. During Al-Mansur's time, control of Al-Andalus was lost, and the Shiites revolted and were defeated a year later at the Battle of Bakhamra. The Abbasids had depended heavily on the support of Persians in their overthrow of the Umayyads. Abu al-Abbas' successor, Al-Mansur, welcomed non-Arab Muslims to his court. While this helped integrate Arab-owned Persian cultures, it alienated many of their Arab supporters, particularly the Khorasanian Arabs who had supported them in the battles against the Umayyads. These fissures in the support led to immediate problems. The Umayyads, while out of power, were not destroyed. The only surviving member of the Umayyad royal family, which had been all but annihilated, ultimately made his way to Spain, where he established himself as an independent emir. In 929, Abd ar-Rahman III assumed the title of caliph, establishing Al-Andalus from Córdoba as a rival to Baghdad as the legitimate capital of the Islamic Empire. In 756, the Abbasid Caliph Al-Mansur sent over 4,000 Arab mercenaries to assist the Chinese Tang dynasty in the Anshi rebellion against Al-Lushan. The Abbasids, or Black Flags, as they were commonly called, were known in Tang dynasty chronicles as the Haidashi. The black-robed Tars. Al-Rashid sent embassies to the Chinese Tang dynasty and established good relations with them. After the war, these embassies remained in China, with Caliph Harun al-Rashid establishing an alliance with China. Several embassies from the Abbasid caliphs to the Chinese court have been recorded in the Tiang annals, the most important of these being those of Abul Abbas al-Safa, the founder of the Abbasid dynasty, Abu Ja'far, and Harun al-Rashid. Abbasid Golden Age. The Abbasid leadership had to work hard in the last half of the 8th century, under several competent caliphs and the viziers, to overcome the political challenges created by the far-flung nature of the empire, and the limited communication across it, and usher in the administrative changes needed to keep order. It was also during this early period of the dynasty, in particular during the governance of Al-Mansur, Harun al-Rashid, and Al-Ma'mun, that the reputation and power of the dynasty was created. Al-Mahdi restarted the fighting with the Byzantines, and his sons continued the conflict until Empress Irene pushed for peace. After several years of peace, Nicephorus I broke the treaty, then fended off multiple incursions during the first decade of the 9th century. These attacks pushed into the Taurus Mountains, culminating with a victory at the Battle of Chrysos and the massive invasion of 806, led by Rashid himself. Rashid's navy also proved successful as he took Cyprus. Eventually, the momentum turned and much of the land gained was lost. Rashid decided to focus on the rebellion of Rafi ibn al-Layth in Khorasan and died while there. While the Byzantine Empire was fighting Abbasid rule in Syria and Anatolia, military operations during this period were minimal, as the caliphate focused on internal matters, its governors exerting greater autonomy and using their increasing power to make the positions hereditary. At the same time, the Abbasids faced challenges closer to home. Harun al-Rashid turned on the Barmakids, a Persian family that had grown significantly in power within the administration of the state, and killed most of the family. During the same period, several factions began either to leave the empire for other lands or to take control of distant parts of the empire away from the Abbasids. The reign of al-Rashid and his sons were considered to be the apex of the Abbasids. After Rashid's death, the empire was split by a civil war between the Caliph al-Amin and his brother al-Ma'mun, who had the support of Khorasan. This war ended with a 2-year siege of Baghdad and the eventual death of al-Amin in 813. Al-Ma'mun ruled for 20 years of relative calm interspersed with a rebellion supported by the Byzantines in Azerbaijan by the Karamites. Al-Ma'mun was also responsible for the creation of an autonomous Khorasan and continued repulsing of Byzantine forays. Al-Muttalib gained power in 833 and his rule marked the end of the strong caliphs. He strengthened his personal army with Turkish mercenaries and promptly restarted the war with the Byzantines. His military excursions were generally successful, culminating with a resounding victory in the sack of Amorium. His attempt at seizing Constantinople failed when his fleet was destroyed by a storm. The Byzantines restarted the fighting by sacking Damietta in Egypt. Al-Muttalib responded by sending his troops into Anatolia again, sacking and marauding until they were eventually annihilated in 863. Fracture to autonomous dynasties. Even by 820, the Samanids had begun the process of exercising independent authority in Transoxiana and Greater Khorasan, as had the Shia Hamdanids in northern Syria and the succeeding Tahirid and Safarid dynasties of Iran. The Safarids, from Khorasan, nearly seized Baghdad in 876, and the Tulunids took control of most of Syria. The trend of weakening of the central power and strengthening of the minor caliphates on the periphery continued, except for the 10-year period of al-Muttalib's rule. He brought parts of Egypt, Syria, and Khorasan back into the Abbasids' control, especially after the anarchy at Samarra. The Abbasid central government was weakened and centrifugal tendencies became more prominent in the caliphate's provinces. By the early 10th century, the Abbasids almost lost control of Iraq to various emirs, and the Caliph al-Radi was forced to acknowledge the power by creating the position of Prince of Princes. Al-Mustakfi had a short reign from 944 to 946, and it was during this period that the Persian faction known as the Buyids from Dalim swept into power and assumed control over the bureaucracy in Baghdad. According to the history of Miskawayh, they began distributing IQTAS to the supporters. This period of localized secular control was to last nearly 100 years. The loss of Abbasid power to the Buyids would shift as the Seljuks would take over from the Persians. At the end of the 8th century, the Abbasids found they could no longer keep a huge polity larger than that of Rome together from Baghdad. In 700 993, the Shiite dynasty of Idrids set up a state from Fez in Morocco, while a family of governors under the Abbasids became increasingly independent until they founded the Aghlabid Emirate from the 830s. Al-Muttalib started the downward slide by utilizing non-Muslim mercenaries in his personal army. Also during this period, officers started assassinating superiors with which they disagree, in particular the caliphs. By the 870s, Egypt became autonomous under Ahmad ibn Tulun. In the east as well, governors decreased the ties to the center. The Safarids of Herat and the Samanids of Bukhara had broken away from the 870s, cultivating a much more Persianate culture and statecraft. By this time, only the central lands of Mesopotamia were under direct Abbasid control, with Palestine and the Hijaz often managed by the Tulunids. Byzantium, for its part, had begun to push Arab Muslims farther east in Anatolia. By the 920s, the situation had changed further, as North Africa was lost to the Abbasids, a Shiite sect only recognizing the first 5 imams and tracing its roots to Muhammad's daughter Fatima took control of Idrisi and then Aghlabid domains. Called the Fatimid dynasty, they had advanced to Egypt in 969, establishing the capital near Fustat in Cairo, which they built as a bastion of Shiite learning and politics. By 1000 they had become the chief political and ideological challenge to Sunni Islam in the form of the Abbasids. By this time the latter state had fragmented into several governorships that, while recognizing caliphal authority from Baghdad, did mostly as they wanted, fighting with each other. The caliph himself was under protection of the Buyid emirs who possessed all of Iraq and western Iran, and were quietly Shiite in their sympathies. Outside Iraq, all the autonomous provinces slowly took on the characteristic of de facto states with hereditary rulers, armies, and revenues, and operated under only nominal caliph suzerainty, which may not necessarily be reflected by any contribution to the treasury, such as the Sumro emirs that had gained control of Sind and ruled the entire province from the capital of Mansoura. Mahmud of Ghazni took the title of Sultan, as opposed to the Emir that had been in more common usage, signifying the Ghaznavid Empire's independence from caliphal authority. Despite Mahmud's ostentatious displays of Sunni orthodoxy and ritual submission to the caliph, in the 11th century, the loss of respect for the caliphs continued. His Islamic rulers no longer mentioned the caliph's name in the Friday khutbah, or struck it off the coinage. The Ismaili Fatimid dynasty of Cairo contested the Abbasids for even the titular authority of the Islamic Ummah. They commanded some support in the Shia sections of Baghdad, although Baghdad was the city most closely connected to the caliphate. Even in the Buyid and Seljuk eras, the Fatimids' green banners contrasted with Abbasids' black, and the challenge of the Fatimids only ended with their downfall in the 12th century. Buyid and Seljuk military control. Despite the power of the Buyid emirs, the Abbasids retained a highly ritualized court in Baghdad, as described by the Buyid bureaucrat Hilal al-Sabi, and they retained a certain influence over Baghdad as well as religious life. As Buyid power waned after the death of Baha al-Dawla, the caliphate was able to regain some measure of strength. The Caliph al-Qadir, for example, led the ideological struggle against the Shia with writings such as the Baghdad Manifesto. The caliphs kept order in Baghdad itself, attempting to prevent the outbreak of fitnas in the capital, often contending with the Ayyaran. With the Buyid dynasty on the wane, a vacuum was created that was eventually filled by the dynasty of Oghuz Turks known as the Seljuks. By 1055, the Seljuks had wrested control from the Buyids and Abbasids, and took any remaining temporal power. When the emir and former slave base Iziri took up the Shia Fatimid banner in Baghdad in 1058, the Caliph al-Qaim was unable to defeat him without outside help. Tofrul Beg, the Seljuk Sultan, restored Baghdad to Sunni rule and took Iraq for his dynasty. Once again, the Abbasids were forced to deal with a military power that they could not match, though the Abbasid Caliph remained the titular head of the Islamic community. The succeeding sultans Al-Parslin and Malik Shah, as well as the vizier Nizam al-Mulk, took up residence in Persia, but held power over the Abbasids in Baghdad. When the dynasty began to weaken in the 12th century, the Abbasids gained greater independence once again. Revival of military strength. While the Caliph al-Mustarshid was the first caliph to build an army capable of meeting a Seljuk army in battle, he was nonetheless defeated in 1135 and assassinated. The Caliph al-Muqtafi was the first Abbasid caliph to regain the full military independence of the caliphate, with the help of his vizier Ibn Hubayri. After nearly 250 years of subjection to foreign dynasties, he successfully defended Baghdad against the Seljuks in the Siege of Baghdad, thus securing Iraq for the Abbasids. The reign of al-Izir brought the caliphate back into power throughout Iraq, based in large part on the Sufi Fuqaha organizations that the caliph headed. Al-Mustanzir built the Mustanziriya school in an attempt to eclipse the Seljuk-era Nizamiya built by Nizam al-Mulk. Mongol invasion in 1206, Genghis Khan established a powerful dynasty among the Mongols of Central Asia. During the 13th century, this Mongol empire conquered most of the Eurasian landmass, including both China in the east and much of the old Islamic Caliphate in the west. Hulagu Khan's destruction of Baghdad in 1258 is traditionally seen as the approximate end of the Golden Age. Mongols feared that a supernatural disaster would strike if the blood of al-Mustazim, a direct descendant of Muhammad's uncle Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, and the last reigning Abbasid caliph in Baghdad, was spilled. The Shiites of Persia stated that no such calamity had happened after the deaths of Husayn ibn Ali. Nevertheless, as a precaution and in accordance with a Mongol taboo which forbade spilling royal blood, Hulagu had al-Mustazim wrapped in a carpet and trampled to death by horses on the 20th of February 1258. The caliph's immediate family was also executed, with the lone exceptions of his youngest son who was sent to Mongolia and a daughter who became a slave in the harem of Hulagu. Abbasid Caliphate of Cairo. In the 9th century, the Abbasids created an army loyal only to the caliphate composed of non-Arab origin people known as Mamluks. This force, created in the reign of al-Ma'mun and his brother and successor al-Muttalib, prevented the further disintegration of the empire. The Mamluk army, though often viewed negatively, both helped and hurt the caliphate. Early on, it provided the government with a stable force to address domestic and foreign problems. However, creation of this foreign army and al-Mutasim's transfer of the capital from Baghdad to Samarra created a division between the caliphate and the peoples they claimed to rule. In addition, the power of the Mamluks steadily grew until al-Radi was constrained to hand over most of the royal functions to Muhammad ibn Abd. The Mamluks eventually came to power in Egypt. In 1261, following the devastation of Baghdad by the Mongols, the Mamluk rulers of Egypt re-established the Abbasid Caliphate in Cairo. The first Abbasid Caliph of Cairo was al-Mustanzir. The Abbasid Caliphs in Egypt continued to maintain the presence of authority, but it was confined to religious matters. The Abbasid Caliphate of Cairo lasted until the time of al-Muttalib III, who was taken away as a prisoner by Selim I to Constantinople, where he had a ceremonial role. He died in 1543, following his return to Cairo.